All right, if you're gearing up for your AWS exams, or maybe you're a builder just trying to figure out how the biggest startups scale up without going totally broke, well, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're diving into an intense, super high-value explainer covering advanced AWS services. You can really think of this as your ultimate consultant's playbook for not just passing the exam, but actually building better, leaner startups. We are definitely not here just to memorize textbook definitions today. We're going deep. We're looking at the real-world architecture of mid-size and large startups. We're going to see exactly how advanced AWS tools solve some massive technical headaches, but more importantly, how they drastically optimize operational costs. We're talking about saving serious money at scale here.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to kick things off with automating using CloudFormation. Then we'll talk about achieving global speed with CloudFront. Dive into serverless savings using Lambda, and finally we'll wrap the whole thing up by looking at the AWS ecosystem advantage. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Automating with CloudFormation. Okay, I want you to imagine a scenario. Your startup's infrastructure suddenly needs to be replicated rapidly, or worse, someone made a massive error and you have to rebuild the whole thing from scratch. Well, that right there is exactly where CloudFormation comes in. Now, for your exam, you absolutely need to know this definition. CloudFormation is an AWS service that enables you to provision and manage your infrastructure as code using YAML or JSON files. If you happen to be familiar with Terraform, this is basically the AWS native equivalent. And this comparison really shows why the big enterprises rely on it so heavily. Think about it. Manual setup. You're searching for EC2, you're launching an instance, picking the OS, configuring hard drives, messing with security groups. I mean, it's a ton of clicking. And if you ever need to spin up a new machine, repeating those exact same steps manually is just begging for human error, right? Your machines just aren't going to behave the same way. But with CloudFormation, you define all of it, your IP addresses, your load balancers, the whole shebang, in a single YAML file. You push that to GitHub for version control, and boom, you automate your resource creation identically every single time. And you know, the operational cost savings here are just huge. Automation literally means less engineering time wasted on manual, tedious configurations. Plus, there is a massive security and disaster recovery benefit. Say the worst happens and your AWS account gets compromised. You can instantly replicate your entire startup infrastructure into a brand new AWS account just by uploading that exact same YAML file. It's like a magic undo button. Okay, let's test that retention a bit. Time for a quick rapid-fire exam practice question. Which service allows a startup to replicate its entire cluster of EC2 instances and load balancers to a new AWS account using a single JSON file? Got it? The answer is AWS CloudFormation. Here is the crucial trick for the exam. Whenever you see the phrase infrastructure as code tied directly to AWS native services, especially mentioning YAML or JSON, CloudFormation is almost certainly your go-to answer. Moving on to Section 2, Global Speed using CloudFront. Let's pivot for a second and focus on user experience and delivering media. Imagine you're the lead architect, and your users are constantly complaining about heavy video buffering. It's a nightmare, right? To solve this, you are going to need CloudFront. Here is your exam-ready definition. It's a content delivery network, or CDN, that securely delivers data, videos, and APIs to users globally with low latency. When you're reading those exam questions, keep your eyes peeled for those specific keywords: content delivery network and low latency. Let's actually map out how this works geographically. Step 1. A user over in India requests a video, but that video is stored all the way over in the US East 1 region. Without a CDN, that data has a really long trip to make. But look at Step 2. CloudFront caches that video at the nearest edge location right there in India. So, by Step 3, when the very next user in India tries to play that exact same video, it loads instantly from that local cache. It never even has to hit your central server back in the US. This is a totally brilliant dual benefit for growing startups. Think about it. Without CloudFront, you're dealing with high latency, which means buffering for the user. And you are paying high data transfer costs for constantly dragging that data across a massive global network. But with CloudFront, the user gets a way faster app with instant load times, and the startup pays significantly less in cross-region cloud networking costs. It is a win-win. All right, time for practice question number 2. Let's tie this technical problem directly back to our startup cost scenario. Your startup stores static media assets in US East 1, causing slow load times for users in Mumbai. Which service reduces this latency and lowers data transfer costs?
You guessed it, the answer is AWS CloudFront.
And as a quick aside, it's pretty amazing how vast these edge locations actually are. They're so configurable that they can even append headers to give you a user's approximate location. Like, it can tell if they're coming from Chandigarh or Delhi, which actually lets you build custom routing features right down to the city level.
Okay, Section 3, Serverless Savings with Lambda. Let's shift gears away from infrastructure and networking, and let's talk about your actual application logic.
Say hello to AWS Lambda. Lambda is a serverless compute service that lets you run code without provisioning or managing servers, and it is entirely triggered by events. Now, a really important note here. Serverless doesn't literally mean there are 0 servers somewhere in a massive data center. It just means you don't have to think about them at all. You just write your function, deploy it, and let AWS handle all the underlying execution and scaling.
The real magic of Lambda is all about its triggers. You can trigger a Lambda function based on a simple API request passing through API Gateway. You can set it to trigger on a schedule, like a cron job, using EventBridge. Or, if we tie this back to concepts you might have seen in earlier chapters, you can trigger it whenever a new message drops into an SQS queue, or when a notification hits an SNS topic.
Now check out that massive number, 2 million. Startups get 2 million free Lambda invocations every single month. That's huge. And honestly, even after you pass that limit, the price per request is incredibly low. This basically means you can run your application's core logic at almost 0 cost when you're just getting off the ground. Let's do our final technical practice question. This one's going to test your knowledge of both the compute service itself and the trigger mechanism. Here we go. A startup wants to run a background function every night at 2 a.m. without managing an EC2 server. Which service should they use and what triggers it? The answer is AWS Lambda, triggered by an EventBridge cron job. Seriously, Lambda is the ultimate cost optimization tool whenever you're dealing with unpredictable traffic or, like in this case, scheduled background workloads. All right, Section 4, the AWS ecosystem advantage. We really need to address the elephant in the room when it comes to cloud architecture and tying all of these amazing services together. First, let's take a look at this matrix to summarize our whole exam review today. If your startup's need is infrastructure automation, your solution is CloudFormation, and the keywords to look out for on the exam are YAML, JSON, and infrastructure as code. If you need global asset delivery, you're looking at CloudFront, with keywords like CDN and edge caching. And for serverless logic, it's Lambda, looking out for zero administration and triggers.
Now, here's the catch. When you use CloudFormation, CloudFront, Lambda, API Gateway, and maybe some of the newer AI services like Bedrock all together, it becomes incredibly difficult to ever migrate away to another cloud provider. This is what we call vendor lock-in. But the sources make it very clear why major startups are totally fine with this. The integration is just seamless. Plus, developers absolutely love it because the alternative is trying to manage downtime and piece together a bunch of cheaper, less stable third-party tools. AWS has become the gold standard simply because its 24/7 stability and that massive ecosystem scaling potential just work. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. I want to leave you with a question to really chew on. With CloudFormation laying down your solid foundation, CloudFront delivering your assets at lightning speed globally, and Lambda running your serverless logic essentially for free, how will you architect your very next startup project so it can scale from day one? Keep that question in the back of your mind as you continue studying. Good luck on those exams.